The projectionist arrived in town on a Tuesday that smelled like old rain and frying oil. It came at dawn on a low flatbed truck, anachronistic, black-painted, and humming with a small engine that sounded like a throat clearing. No one in the market could remember seeing anything like it before. A compacted caravan of black wood and brass, with shutters like eyelids and a tall chimney that smoked faintly, as if whatever it held had been breathing all along. They parked it where the old Wolfson lot used to be, the one with the cracked asphalt and the graffiti roses, and a boy from the bakery alley, who always had flour on his forearm, saw a man step out. He was thin as a slat, with a coat that hung too long and a cap low over his brow. His eyes were pale like isinglass. Behind him, through the window of the caravan, someone had strung a strip of film like bunting. He called himself the projectionist. He rolled out a small wooden board and nailed an invitation to the telephone pole. The letters hand-cut from newspaper and pasted on with a glistening glue. "Come see what you remember," it promised. "Come see what you could have been." Curiosity in small towns is a currency as heavy as gold. People who had never seen the opera, and others who had, came because the church bells were chiming too late and the market was closed for reasons of grief and grocery. They came in coats buttoned against the thin October cold, and they stood in a line that knit itself around the lot like a ribbon. Mara came because she had nothing better to do. She was 31, with a job at the library and a habit of making tea for people who were too polite to refuse it. She had moved back to her hometown after her mother's funeral and found herself inheriting a life. She had not asked for an attic full of things that smelled of lavender and mothballs, a small brick house with a sag in its roof, and a silence that fit like someone else's gloves. The projectionist's sign read like an answer to a question she hadn't known how to ask. "Come see what you remember." Inside the caravan, the air smelled of ozone and caramel. The projectionist took her ticket, an old bus token, and slid it with a small gold blade. The interior was smaller than she expected, more intimate. Rows of narrow seats faced a screen that hung from the ceiling like a curtain. Bottles of soda chilled in a wooden crate. Beside them sat a stack of photographs, all black and white, curled at the edges. "You know how it works?" he asked when she sat. His voice was like paper rustling in a box. "No," she said, "but I'd like to." "You pay with what you remember," he said, and he smiled like someone reading from a script. "Some memories are small coins in a jar. Some are heavier. Decide what you want returned, and the film will show you. But be careful. The film always wants more than it shows." Mara felt something prick her skin. She thought of the box of letters in her attic, the ones she had not read since she returned from university. She thought of the last argument she'd had with her brother, words flung like pebbles, until something glassy shattered. She thought of her mother at the kitchen table, hands folded as if in prayer, and the suddenness of breath that left her. She had moved back to catalog absence. Maybe she had come to pay the debt of forgetting. The lights dimmed. A projector attic, and humming like a living beetle rolled into life. Its wheels spun, and the film threaded through like a pulse entering a body. On the screen flickered a photograph of the town, the bakery, the post office, the willow tree near the river. The film smelled faintly of smoke as it warmed. At first the reels showed the town as it had been, an ordinary life stitched together by ordinary days. Then the film leaned inward, as if it had a lens in its heart frames focused on Mara. A little girl chased a dog down a lane. A teenager slammed a car door and left with a promise. A woman, Mara's mother, bent over a sewing machine and hummed a tune that Mara knew without trying. The footage was precise in the way memory is precise, not a literal copy, but a portrait painted by kinship. When the camera caught Mara's face in a window, she felt a warm, quick sorrow hit her chest, recognition as a physical thing. Then the screen shifted. It lingered on a man, her brother, Tomlining against her father's shed, head bowed, a cigarette between his fingers. She had not seen this footage. It seemed to be a scene half remembered, reconstructed. The sound in the caravan was pressed close, someone coughing, a distant radio. Mara watched herself at 20, at 18, then at an age she hadn't reached in the present. The projectionist ran the film like a priest lighting candles. The audience murmured, but the caravan was a cave of hush. People nudged each other when they recognized themselves in frames. Children laughed when their birthdays rolled past. An old man sat with his hand trembling, watching a woman who was no longer in the world feed bread to a little child. The film reached the night of the funeral. She watched herself stand in the back, hand gripping the pew as if it were a cliff face. Her mother's face was pale and exact. The camera held the moment between breaths, and Mara felt nausea rise, hot and metallic. The projectionist's fingers moved slower, as if savoring the form of a sentence. Then the film stuttered. The frames doubled. The sound became a low, savage hum, like bees that had forgotten how to make honey. The screen darkened, then lit up with a view Mara had never seen, a room she recognized only because her mother's. Needlework lay on the table. There was a silhouette in the doorway, no face, only the slit of a coat. The figure stepped into the room, and the light cast its shadow long and wrong across the table. It was then that Mara realized the film showed not just what she remembered, but what the projectionist had collected, the town's private moments kissing in the dark, weeping over a grave, stealing from a safe and rendered them as a bouquet of small combustions. The film gathered what people thought they had hidden and made it public, but in a way that felt personal. The caravan was a confessional without a screen of brine. Mara wanted to stand up then, to walk out. She wanted to leave before the reel spilled anything beyond what a living person should know. But the caravan was small, and the air thick. Someone near her sobbed, and she felt cruelty like gravity. She sat. The projectionist fed the projector with his hands, slow and deliberate. He seemed absent, as if the film were a thing that chose him and not the other way around. On the screen, the darkness sharpened into a sequence she did not expect, a backyard she had known well. The washing line with the same faded towel, her father's shed, and standing in its doorway. Not a shadow, but the exact silhouette of the man who had come on the trucksamine holding a camera. The figure's head tilted as if listening, and then it nodded once, decisively, and lifted the camera to its face. Mara's throat closed. The film was showing things no one should have recorded. The projectionist had a way of turning privacy into performance. He made acts that were once private into art and interrogation at once. You profited, someone whispered behind her. It could have been anyone, and that underscored the intimacy of the caravan. To witness memory was to be complicit in theft. The projectionist didn't answer, but the film answered for him. It rewound and sped, stitched and tore, moving through scenes like a seamstress who had grown tired of being exact. He showed her the night she had said goodbye to Tom's argument over the old house keys. The slam of the door, the small cruelty of a last word left like a pebble on the shore. But then the film went further. It showed Tom leaving town at dusk, the road slick with rain, and a second car pulling alongside. A handsomeness of a man, unfamiliar, reached out and helped Tom transfer a small crate from his trunk into the other car. The faces blurred. The footage had the wobble of something filmed from a moving train. The crate was labeled in Mara's mother's handwriting. Her pulse tightened. The caravan seemed to tilt. In the audience, someone swore softly, ears pricked like a forest. The film unspooled more. Men meeting in warehouses, late-night exchanges, a ledger of names scrolling in frames like credits of a film that wanted to name the world. On the screen, her mother's hand traced the ledger's page, the ink a braid of receipts and dates. The implication was direct and quiet, like a hand closing around your wrist. Mara felt her stomach fall into her knees. The film was accusing, but not in a pulpit way. It was simply showing. It presented secrets as if they were ordinary objects, and ordinary objects, when laid out, could become instruments of accusation. She left the caravan that night gagging in the cold like a fish pulled from a river. The street light at the corner made a halo in the fog. The crowd dispersed like birds when a cat moves through the grass. Mara walked home without noticing the route. The town looked the same, but she felt the topography of it altered every alley a witness, every window a lens. That night she went into the attic and opened the box of letters. She read past the words she had read months ago into a place she had sealed with the firmness of someone who wants to shield an open wound. There, between epoxy receipts and old postcards, she found a ledger tied with twine. Her mother's careful script labeled it inventory. The first names on the list were commodities: cans of soap, bolts of cloth, jars of preserves. But further down, in a slower hand that tilted like a question, were other names: Mr. Havers 50, Joyce Carltono charge, Tom Rourke small favor. Mara read until the house spun like a top. Her hands trembled as if holding flame. She had loved her mother, and had also come to her with the impatient hunger of a child. She had assumed thrift, thriftiness, and economy of kindness. She had not thought her mother could be ledger keeper to a different sort of market. The next morning Mara went to the feed store. Greg, who had a face like a well-weathered bench, listened to her without surprise. "Everyone's been trading in their reasons for years," he said, pouring her coffee as if the town's crooked ledger was as ordinary as rain. "You pay somebody a favor, and you keep their secret. Nobody asks where the favors came from. You just keep them." Why would my mother? Mara hesitated. She could not say aloud the shape the ledger suggested. "To survive," Greg said. He wiped his hands on his apron. "Different ways. Lines of work that keep a family fed. You didn't see it. Most of us don't. We think we live in one story and not another." The projectionist continued to show films. People lined up, some to see their childhoods, others to confess in images they couldn't otherwise face. The caravan grew a reputation like mold, subtle and inevitable. A woman who'd watched her husband's confession of infidelity threw herself from the wooden platform outside the caravan and walked away without a face. A young man who watched a scene of himself stealing from his boss stopped coming to the factory. Mara found herself drawn back, against her better judgment, to the caravan on a rainy Thursday. She sat in the same seat. The projectionist smiled like a man greeting a coin that had returned to his palm. "You came back," he said. "You showed my mother," she said, unable to keep the accusation from her voice. "I show what is given." He threaded the next reel with a hand that trembled but did not falter. "Sometimes people bring me their own recordings. Sometimes I find them where the world misplaces them. What do you do with what you take?" He paused. The hum of the projector was a small animal in the room. "I make them legible," he said. "I make them shareable. People need to see their lives as a piece of film sometimes. It helps them understand the cuts." Mara thought of blades and hands and of her mother stitching. She thought of the ledger and the crates. The caravan felt like a tribunal that did not call witnesses, but instead exposed evidence like fruit on a table. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally, because the question had turned the corner in her chest and could not be kept in any longer. "Names," he said simply, "and a memory. One for the film. One you will not mind seeing again." She found herself answering before she could stop herself. "What if I don't want to give names?" The projectionist's smile thinned. "Then you will keep them, or they will keep you." The night's film began with Mara as a child against many knees. The sound of a train passing and unrolled into a sequence she had never imagined. A series of late-night meetings by the river, the exchange of packages, the turning of hands like salaries. Faces were clearer now. One of the men who received a crate in the film was not a stranger, but the familiar jawline of the town's mayor. Another face belonged to a woman who ran the dry cleaners. The ledger's list scrolled like a ticker, names and sums, favors and dates. The film showed how favors looped into debts and debts looped into secrecy, and how small towns maintain themselves on an economy of hidden accounts. Mara watched herself haggard and angry, confronting her brother, finger pointed like a question. "What did she do?" she yelled in the film. The room in the reel answered with the coolness of a machine. Tom said nothing, only looked away, and Mara watched the weight of his silence and like a hand on her shoulder. When the film stopped, the projectionist closed the projector with a sigh as if tucking in a child. The caravan's light came up slowly. People emerged in twos and threes, some relieved, some raw. Mara sat frozen. She had paid with the memory of a backyard meeting and the ledger's rusted list, but payment there had been no balance. The projectionist had shown her the world as a system and not an anthology of saints. In his films, everyone was both sinner and accountant. She left the caravan with a ledger in her mind and a nausea that did not leave. The town continued its life, indifferent as a river. People went to work, closed shop, kissed in secret. But now Mara felt each movement as if it had an accounting tick. She watched men she used to think ordinary fold their hands like those who keep dangerous books. Then, one night a week later, Mara received an envelope thrust under her door. The paper was cheap and mottled. Inside was a single photograph smudged at the edge and a note in her mother's angular hand. "You were always meant to see. Keep what you must." Beneath the note was another ledger entry. Her mother's script spelled out a name Mara had not expected Tom Rorkian beside the name a sum. But not currency, return. Her hands shook so hard she could not hold the paper flat. The notations threaded like veins. She went back to the caravan, though every rational part of her wanted to bury the photograph in the ground. The projectionist met her at the door, and this time he did not ask for a memory. He offered her something more dangerous, a trade. "You can watch and understand what the town kept," he said, "or you can become the one who keeps it here, so others won't have to. It is a mercy to hold burdens for others." Mara's head spun in the caravan's low light. The offer shone like a coin in the sun, brilliant and molten. To hold a town's secrets so it might preserve its face of civility. The idea had the shape of heroism, but heroism, she knew now, was often ledgered in silence. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you are willing to see," he said softly. "Because you come back. Because you have been given a ledger and you can read it." The proposition unrolled like a map of a place she had just left. To accept would be to inherit her mother's booked inventory, the favors, the balances. To become the town's private accountant of sins and kindnesses. To refuse would be to continue living under their weight, watching them like a person watches a wall for cracks. Mara thought of Tom and his silence. She thought of her mother's knitting hands and ledger entries. She thought of the photograph pushed under her door. The caravan's hum felt like a heartbeat in her ears. She took a breath and nodded once. The projectionist smiled, not cruelly, but as one who had predicted the weather. He opened a drawer and took out a small black book, its cover plain, the pages blank as new snow. "Write what you take," he said, "and write what you give. The ledger will learn your hand. The film will remember." She signed with a pen that bled ink like a confession. The caravan's door closed behind her, muffling the town to a distant sound. The projectionist fed the projector one more reel, but this time there were no images for the public to see. Instead, he showed Mara what keeping looked like, a room of shelves, each labeled with names and dates, a narrow window where footage could be reviewed, a leather-bound book where favors were recorded as if they were seeds to be planted. "You will have to decide what to keep and what to return," he said. "It is heavy work. People expect you to be kind, but kindness is a tax. Sometimes you will be asked to conceal an act of mercy. Sometimes you will be asked to return something that corrodes the soul. You will be lonely. You will be necessary." Mara thought of her mother's hands, and for the first time she understood the ledger not as a ledger, but as a language of survival. She thought of the way small towns traded in quiet complicities to keep themselves standing. She thought of Tom's silence, which suddenly felt like a ledger entry of its own, unpaid, unfinished, a debt that had a shape. She left the caravan with the black book in her handbag. The projectionist packed up the caravan the next morning without fanfare, the truck humming like an engine settling into sleep. He left a card in the slot of his service window. The projectionist. "Keep what you must." Years passed like film rolling between steady hands. Mara settled into the role the caravan had offered, and in time it became her life. She learned to read people's faces like pages of a ledger, and to sort favors into columns, labeled kindness and cost. She would receive envelopes slid under doors, photographs, small objects, each one a seed to be catalogued. Sometimes she returned what she could. Sometimes she kept it tucked in drawers, like secret bulbs that might bloom into storms. She learned that mercy could be a burden, and that secrecy could be a protection. And she learned, in a trade she had not asked for, how to keep a town moving without breaking it. But secrets have weight. They rust in the ribs and corrode the joints. The black book grew thicker. Her hands, once quick to tie up strings and mend hems, found themselves knotted. There were nights she woke with her heart an echoing hollow, as if the caravan's projector still turned in the dark, and the reel had a voice that would not hush. One winter a child came to her door with cheeks like apples and a tear in his laugh. He had found an old photograph, a scrap of a moment, and he wanted to know if it could be returned. Mara read the ledger, weighed the cost, and decided to return the photograph carefully. She walked to the child's house and handed it over. The child's face bloomed like a dawn. For a week Mara felt a warmth she had not known since her mother's hands smoothed the hem of her shirt. But then a paper appeared slid under her door, a note thanking her for her mercy, and reminding her that every act of return left a ledger entry elsewhere. It is a peculiar thing to be a town's memory keeper. People will love you for mending what you can, and hate you for what you cannot. They will bring you their guilt and their gratitude, their photographs and their confessions. You will hold them in your hands like fragile things. In exchange, you will be lonely in a way that carves hollows where laughter once lived. It is a duty with no public parade, an invisible office that asks you to be both saint and censor. Years folded into years. Mara learned to live with the caravan's absence as she had learned to live with the ledger's weight. She married once and not to anyone pivotal, a man who liked books and could boil eggs properly. They had a child. Tom visited sometimes, his mouth softening in a way that suggested a man who had carried a debt until it cooled into something he could set down. The town hummed on, secrets layered like dust. When Mara grew older, her hands began to tremble as if from the motion of too much accounting. One evening, when the sunset hit the river like a coin, she sat at her kitchen table and opened the black book. Her handwriting had changed with time, more careful, with capitals like small bridges. She wrote the names of the last things she had agreed to keep, a photograph, a ledger, a child's note. At the bottom of the page she paused and then wrote her mother's name, underlining it twice. She realized then the infinite smallness of the caravan's bargain. The projectionist did not want to ruin the world so much as to teach people how to recognize that they were part of one. He had not asked to be worshipped. He asked only that someone make order of what the town could not keep in its head. The lesson had been brutal and private. To remember is to be entrusted, and to be entrusted is to be altered. When Mara finally could no longer bear the ledger's weight alone, she took the black book down to the river. The current caught the sunlight like a blade. She wrote one last note in the margin, brief as a breath, keep what you must. Then she folded the book and placed it in a small wooden box, sealing it as one seals a letter. She walked to the place where the caravan had once parked and left the box buried beneath the cracked asphalt, its lid meeting the soil like a promise. She did not see the projectionist again. Sometimes she wondered whether he had been an ordinary man with a caravan, or an arrangement of the town's needs given shape. But the caravan's lesson remained: memory, when traded and tended, can hold a community together. But it was also a weight that could break the keeper. On her last night, as the moon wound itself thin and the town breathed in sleep, Mara sat by the window and watched the willow's reflection in the slow river. She thought of film-off frames that show light and shadow, of reels that turn until they fray. She thought of the ledger and the black book, and how each town must find a way to contain its ghosts. In the morning her son would find a note and know what to do, or he would not. The town would go on. People would still call each other in the evenings and keep each other's secrets, in exchange for small kindnesses. She died with a photograph tucked in her hand, a picture of her mother and a younger Mara, both laughing on a platform as a train arrived. The moment caught in a light that made everything seem possible. The black book remained buried. The caravan never returned. But sometimes, in the sound of a projector's hum on late nights, when films were shown at the school hall, someone would swear they could hear the soft boot of a man walking down an aisle, the faint rattle of film, and a paper voice that said, keep what you must. And so the town kept its lights on and its ledgers closed in drawers, and people went on making economies of favors and keeping the fragile architecture of civility intact. They loved their dead in public and hid their debts in private. The projectionist had taught the MIF a lesson can be taught without protest: that memory is both currency and cure, that preservation demands cost, and that some people will always be asked to carry what the rest of us cannot.